Hey,
So
hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Rita, you don't have this cold, do you? You feeling
Uh,
okay?
I'm like not clear what day or time it is other than that.
That's fair. So I got this cold now, and the same thing happened to me at Cloud Native Security Con. I got like a non-COVID cold. So like I think I have this theory now about like Cloud Native Con crud that is just like gonna be every time I attend one of these events, I'm gonna like just get this nasty cold. And like it's fine as long as it stays not COVID. Like, I can deal with that.
Yeah, a few of my friends who've come back from KubeCon have tested positive for COVID this week. So
Yeah, there was a little bit there. I feel I was in like second degree contact with, but I don't think anyone I interacted with directly has tested positive. So I keep hoping.
I like how they sent out an email at the beginning, like the two people they've found two people with COVID, we've sent them home. It's kind of like, I'm sure there's many more people with COVID in this hall.
Uh,
Hello.
Hey,
All right. Do we have everybody? Does anyone want to share their screen just so that while we're talking, we're taking notes? I know that's been helpful in other community calls. Any volunteers? We can take turns.
I can do that. Second.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I see, Julian, you added the sync resource proposal. If you want, maybe we can move it up. You want to do that first? That way we unblock you.
That would be great if you don't mind.
Yeah, and plus the KubeCon stuff, it might take a while. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, basically, we've had this doc ongoing, Anlan and I have been working on it. And we just we're hoping we could use this FaceTime to resolve that last comment thread of yours. I did add a couple pieces to the doc, which reflected things we had talked about, specifically a shout out to metrics and how this new object would fit into the existing metric story. We also changed the name of the object to sync set, which we hoped was, still took advantage of using that word sync to convey the same concept across this new resource and the config resource that already exists. And then the third piece was adding per like and condition errors on templates. So that would be like, so that if a person didn't have any referential sync configuration for a template, errors would show up in the status field of that template saying like, hey, you need to add something that does this, which would solve for that issue that kind of started this conversation. So those were kind of like some individual tactical points. And I think you also had questions about kind of maybe that were a little bit more macro. So maybe I can open the doc, we can revisit them. Let's see how I do this. Share screen. There we go. Cool. Yeah, so I had put a little online, I had chat about it, hoping to sync up with you. So I think this is the comment thread we had that we had in mind, which had some more overarching questions that were separate from the conversation you and I had in Slack.
We're still looking at Max's screen. I don't know.
Actually, Zoom
Oh,
allows.
I'm sharing my
multiple
screen. I don't know what
screens.
am I supposed to do something else?
I think for folks that want to view Julian's screen, you can go to view options and select his screen, because apparently Zoom allows you to share multiple screens.
Fancy.
Here, I'll just stop presenting for now. Does that?
Anybody see? It's a Google Doc.
I see a black box. There it is.
Boom. Okay, so I have to have the tab open, so I can't look at any of you. I can't see your face because if I move away from this tab, it turns into a black.
Open it in the second window, maybe.
Yeah, let's try that. Let's see, is it gonna get mad at me? Does it still work?
I can still see it.
I love it. Okay, so yeah, Rita, with maybe we can just start rattling off these questions and see what comes to light. So we said, if this is future work, then the near-term solution still requires users to manually create the CRs. Yeah, basically, like our thinking here is that this is a piece of the eventual kind of, maybe to call it like product or user solution, but that it's a fundamental building block that enables a number of other better solutions than what we have today. And also beneficially is a little bit less opinionated in the way that does that, so that we could build different kinds of experiences, all of which will interoperate or at least could be used interchangeably in an elegant way. We have some call outs to like, a shift left kind of experience via Gator. I think that's something that definitely has a home in open source. And then there's this kind of controller style version of it, which due to the powerful privileges that Gatekeeper has. If we build that into Gatekeeper, we create this privilege escalation problem that's called out otherwise in the doc. And so that part seems more like something that exists in addition, perhaps in open source. Companies may want to make things that look like this. Yeah, does that make sense? Can people hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think a dirt simple kind of open source way of doing this is you could put a sync set next to a template in the library if
Totally.
you wanted to.
I think, yeah. Rita, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand the sort of like we don't want to decide for the users concerns. Were you able to look at like, you know, is there a way we could derive the GVKs from the require sync data annotation that
We
users
absolutely are going to do
provided?
that as part of this. So Online actually is already like halfway towards doing that. And part of this effort, right, to enable the Gator part, the Gator solution part, you would have to have something that can like, I think it's unmarshal those like strings, right, the annotation value, and turn it into some kind of useful structured data. That logic would live in open source. It would be used in a Gator type of thing. It would also probably be used by these hypothetical other things.
Right, but it will still require the user to run Gator to create sync sets, right? It wouldn't be something we create for the user in the cluster.
So I guess in Max's scenario of like we, you know, at least when it comes to our Gatekeeper library and open source, we could use Gator to make those and then have them in the repo, so they'd already be there. For users who are using this in a way that is outside of that paradigm, then they could make them themselves or could have this hypothetical controller make them.
Gotcha. I mean, I think it's better than what we have today. But I mean, yeah, let's put it out there and see what kind of reactions we get. But I just kind of want to call out like the elephant in the room, in that the whole point of this proposal is to make it easy for people, right? So that they don't have to do much.
Well, there's making it easy for people, and there's creating a security hole in our product, right? And the reason why we don't want to just natively as gatekeepers say, oh, let's introspect this constraint template, see what synced resources it requires, and then automatically do those syncs, is it inescapably intertwines the ability to create constraint templates with read all permissions on the cluster, right? So you can imagine creating a constraint template that reads secrets, for instance, to dump all contents. And so in a world where, you know, the creating constraint templates is the highest privilege, not so much of a concern, but the fact that you cannot RBAC those things separately means that it becomes this all or nothing proposition. So because you can RBAC sync sets separately, the ability to create constraint templates is not necessarily the ability to read everything in the cluster. And then if you wanted to add that functionality on, it can be built on top of sync sets, and you could do that in various different ways, right? So for instance, if you had a hosted product, right, and it installed templates, presumably the source of truth for those templates is a trusted source, right? So privilege escalation is less of a concern. So it can create sync sets, right? But if users are also creating their own, right? They are able to do the privilege separation on their end. If you have, again, something like the library, then having the sync sets next to the templates on the library means that for those users where they are okay with people applying stuff from the library, also being able to have read all on the cluster, then the RBAC that they set up will allow them to apply sync sets. If not, then not, right? So what this winds up with is it gives people more granularity security controls. It still enables building out of automated syncing solutions in various patterns, right? So we're not being prescriptive about, hey, Gatekeeper is really the way to manage these syncs. And wow, I think that's it really. It has the security, it has the configurability. We could go into like technical details around thrashing of the cache, right? And the need to introspect on the cluster as to like changing the set of templates on a cluster might lead to a bit more wild referential data actions, which could either cause load on the cluster or a bit more unpredictable enforcement profiles. But I don't know. To me, the privilege escalation thing is decisive.
And actually, you brought up a good point, and maybe I missed this in the doc, or maybe it wasn't addressed. But either way, if not, let's make sure to add it. Is the RBAC piece, right? So, I get exactly what you're saying about having like more granular way to define the RBAC, but however, the actual RBAC in terms of granting permission to the resources that we're syncing, that happens outside of Gatekeeper, is it? Because today, if you look at the deployment YAML, we are basically giving Gatekeeper access to everything, right?
Right.
In order to sync. Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's why we need to be careful about how Gatekeeper can be configured.
Agreed. So from that perspective, what we have now is like too much power, right? And by introducing this, we're able to reduce that power. So my question is, who actually does the RBAC grants? Is it do we do this programmatically, or does this happen outside of Gatekeeper?
So there's a code level answer to this, and there's also like the default manifest / Helm template installation question, right? So at a code level, the code has no opinion on RBAC, right? The effect of Gatekeeper not having the permissions it wants is that watches will fail. So if someone wanted to lock down a Gatekeeper binary by adding or removing grants, they absolutely could, right? And I don't think we want to build any assumption to the contrary in the code. If we're talking about our vanilla model, what we do, like for just kubectl apply deploy / gatekeeper.yaml, we do grant everything, but that's mostly a convenience thing, right? Like once, if a user installs a thing and they want to like kick it around, they expect it to work, right? We're not going to try to configure high availability because that requires knowing their cluster infrastructure. We're not going to try to lock down RBAC because we don't know, same thing, like the types of resources on the cluster, their security posture, but we're absolutely not going to prevent the user from locking things down. Helm, I'm not sure what configuration knobs we have. The default would probably be the same. If we wanted to make it easier for users to scope down the read-write access that the Gatekeeper service account has, I see no problem with doing so. And then when you get into, again, these like hosted solutions, whether it's Azure, Google, someone writing their own thing, OpenShift, they again can do whatever they want to with whatever their install mechanism is. So you could imagine something that uses syncs to update the RBAC of the gatekeeper process itself, just to guard against the impact of the pod being pwned.
Okay, so so the question is, are we, with this new thing introduced, are we by default going to reduce the permission level, or we're going to keep it the way it is?
So what this does is it keeps things from getting worse. So the current state of affairs is Gatekeeper, the service account, has read access to everything. And constraint template users have read access to anything that's been cached. But what constraint template users do not have is the ability to change what's being cached, right? So Gatekeeper has kind of this internal RBAC where, yes, technically it will read anything, but unless you've given the user permissions to alter the config resource, they can't change the surface area of things they can read. So it's kind of like the API server in that regard, right? The API server can technically read whatever you want, but unless you've passed your auth-z, auth-n checks, it's not going to give you the answer that you're asking for, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's totally fine to say, like, for now we're going to keep it. I just want some kind of acknowledgement that this is a problem that we acknowledge today, and we will, and I wonder how, even if it's not now, but maybe in the future, the sync set resource could be used to provide like opt-in RBAC instead of opt-out. It kind of feels like today is like all, right? Like you're giving Gatekeeper all of the permissions, and so maybe with sync set, right, we could eventually, maybe down the road, reduce that surface area. And this actually reminds me of something that so the Istio guys, right, they or I guess like Gateway API, as well as like the storage folks, they're asking SIG-auth to maybe add something called reference grant, which basically it reminded me of that, meaning how can we have something on top of RBAC such that you give RBAC to certain resources, but then only the resources that are granted can actually get those permissions. So I mean that doesn't exist yet, and it's still in kept phase, but potentially maybe sync set could be used for that purpose.
So oh, sorry, Amlan, you've been unmuting. So
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, you could probably just like inform users, like, if they don't want people to be able to see the config, like, they can just disable secrets. If they were to use like any control, like if they were to implement their own on-cluster controller, like they can just disable secret access for that controller, and then that would be like an easy peasy way to do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the issue, I think, is that RBAC has this reflexive problem that in order to grant RBAC permissions, you need those RBAC permissions yourself. So in terms of like Gatekeeper, the binary solving this, it can't because it cannot grant itself permissions it does not have, right? So either it has scope down permissions or not. So you would need a third-party process to do this granting, which is, I think, what you were suggesting, Amlan. And so, yes, this sync config does give the ability to have a third-party watcher process performing these grants. Whether that's a better security surface if you're just installing this on your own cluster or not. I don't like, which do you trust more, the gatekeeper build or the operator builds, right? Is it better to have two binaries and hoping they're secure versus one? I'm sure there's well-formed opinions on either side. But what probably is a bit more secure is if you have a process running off cluster that's doing these grants, right? Maybe something that's not exposed to your local network or to the internet as a whole, which would be the risk, right? With something running on cluster. And that kind of model you could only do if you had like specialized access to infrastructure. So again, this is cloud providers, this is people running their own hardware, right? So that they have a command and control server that's running in their data center that is operating clusters, but not in the clusters, that kind of stuff.
I think just getting back to this though, I just wanted to acknowledge that this sync set is helping us decouple the people who's deploying the policies versus like the people who wrote the policy, right? Like that part I totally understand, which is why we can't just take what's in the constraint template and say it's all or nothing, right? So I get that. I just want to acknowledge that that is a separate problem from like RBAC itself, right? Meaning, yes, you could have a constraint that maybe only expose certain things to be synced, but RBAC is still very much wide open, right?
I mean, kind of. It is a Kubernetes problem that the delegation model isn't great with the current primitives.
Right.
I think what I'm trying to point out though is that at least RBAC intent is still expressible with the sync set model, whereas there would be no way if we just read constraint templates
Sure.
and auto-generated to separate those two.
Okay. I think I just want to get back to the proposal itself. I think it's fine as is. What do other folks think? Any other concerns, I guess? All right, Julian, it sounds like you might, if there's nothing else, maybe move on to the next thing.
Sure. That sounds great. Thanks everyone for the time. Rita, I can leave this comment open for now, maybe if other people want to chime in, but can we count it as an okay to move forward on your end?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Was there anything else from this proposal? And also, I saw this issue. I want to make sure this issue is addressed by this proposal. Allow syncing all possible resource versions. I think it should, right? Meaning if assuming like sync set is here, then this user could just define what versions that they want in sync set, and I think they want to use wildcard. Would that be?
Yeah,
okay.
Oh, go ahead, Alon.
I guess I was confused about this ask because I mean, like, theoretically things should be like backwards compatible anyway, right? So you should be able to grab the latest version with whatever's versions being synced on the cluster. Like we're gonna end up choosing one version per syncs or per like equivalent set anyway. Like if you have 6 versions listed of Ingress or whatever, we're going to choose one of them, presumably the latest one, but it shouldn't really matter because they should all be accessible via one of them.
I'll chime in there really quick. I'd actually say on the thing that you're talking about, I would argue is like an opinionated usage, right? Like if somebody like, say you had a template and you were like, I want to be super sure, right? And I want to sync all of them. The sync set would allow someone to do that. We could argue that it's a waste of resources, right? And that an opinionated usage should probably not do that. But that's one of those things that we kind of dodge in this by saying, we're going to let you configure it the way you want. What we're going to take care of is like more this providing you with a resource which allows for other types of benefits like the RBAC, preventing the privilege escalation, the ability to create owner references, things like that.
But we have to be in like whether or not we support the wildcard, right? Like that's like at that point.
There, yes.
If we don't support the wildcard, they can't use the wildcard. They have to manually update their templates.
So my question would be, why need a wildcard? Why would you want to sync all versions? Because there is a downside here, right? If you have 3 versions, you're tripling the size of your memory requirements to sync that resource, assuming all versions are roughly equally sized, which they probably are.
I think probably this person has the same misunderstanding that I had going into this, which was assuming that like when you cache a specific version, it only caches ones that were like created as that version, even though they're all stored as one underlying version. And additionally, they probably don't realize that like if you sync something multiple times just to be safe, like it's going to duplicate the memory. I think that's not something that like I personally understood going into this about like the workings of the open cache. So I think those are 2 things we can say and still see if they come back with that and like still concerns.
Yeah, because I personally like, I would hold off on the wildcard for an MVP. Like just from a coding perspective, if you see a wildcard, you're going to need to hit the discovery API. You're going to need to unpack that wildcard. It's not like impossible, but it does raise the complexity, and there's no technical reason why wildcards can't be added after the fact. But we can't take them away. So from the perspective of like delivering the first thing faster and also giving us time to like understand how this thing works before making a decision, I don't see it as a trade-off, right? To not do wildcards first and then put a pin in, do we add them later?
Yeah, additionally, I would just say my feeling with something like that, right, is someone's like, I have this friction, right? And they're trying to express the friction in a GitHub issue, and they express it as the desire for a specific feature, right? And so I think I'm gonna follow up, just like Rita said, and maybe we can get some more color on exactly what that friction was, and maybe we can find a way to solve their problem without choosing exactly what they suggest.
Yeah, I think the description says like it's when they upgrade, right? Is having to know all the different versions that would need to be evaluated while they're going through different Kubernetes versions. That is pretty painful.
Very true. So I think that I would argue that that's kind of built into the at least the vision that we have, right? Because like if you had Gator and it was able to say, I'm going to look at the requires. Well, I guess this is, I guess I'm coupling 2 things together. If we're working with templates that have the annotation on them, they expressed already the versions they support. And assuming that actually is compatible with the cluster, grabbing those and bringing that onto the cluster would get you something that would work. This wouldn't be true for someone who's just trying to not use that annotation at all. but then that person might use the config resource or something like that.
Wait,
I
that
guess
means you,
so you're saying find source of truth.
sorry,
I
go
couldn't
ahead.
hear.
No, you're probably gonna say the same thing.
Go ahead.
So like in that situation you were talking about, like they're still using the template as the source of truth, and I think their argument was like we don't want to have to update the template manually. Like if we're using that as a source of truth, we wanted to just automatically grab the latest version.
Sorry, is it just me or I couldn't hear you very well?
Also for me.
Yeah, you've gone very quiet. There's also like a bit of, I don't know what
Echoing.
it is, like jerkiness to your audio. Like it drops like the last 10th of a syllable for whatever reason.
That's very strange. I'll just let Rita go with it. I'll grab earbuds or something.
Let me so what I was gonna say is, like, let's say I'm in between upgrades, right? So does that mean I have to run Gator again just to get the new sync set and then deploy it in the cluster before I upgrade?
That would be one way to solve this problem. But I think what many people would end up preferring is that this controller entity that we're alluding to, something like that is well positioned to solve a problem like this because it can perform discovery dynamically. And like it is the actor which fundamentally can solve this problem in a way that is that takes out of the user's hands, and they get this kind of like, you know, just they get to sit back and let the computer do the work. Yeah.
Right, but I thought the in-cluster, maybe I misunderstood that. I thought the in-cluster generating controller is out of scope for now.
That yeah, that is true. I guess I'm kind of saying that like the I don't know, I guess it feels to me a little bit like we've got this solution and then there's like, you know, things that would be built on top of it. Do you feel that that's a bad idea? That to me, it kind of feels like this is a very useful thing to build because we can build other things on top of it. And it's not opinionated and dodges some notable problems like the privilege escalation, but it doesn't really eliminate things. I think that's one of its great strengths. But it feels like, do you feel differently?
I think, don't get me wrong, I think the shift left Gator thing is a great MVP to get things out, and it's already better than we have today. But I think in order to, let's say, address this user's where, you know, let's say you have to take care of upgrade scenarios, then the in cluster controller is absolutely necessary. That's what I'm getting from the doc, I think.
I would agree. I mean, I think as a user, that's probably what I would choose for my just for ease of use and not worrying about it.
I agree in principle. The in-cluster controller bit is a bit prescriptive to me, personally. Like, yes, that is a model, but you know, depending on, are they using Argo CD? Are they, you know, working with a cloud? Are they using, is it a controller that's watching all constraint templates, or is it something more like OpenShift's operator, right? And you have something installing a library, right? Because if you're writing your own constraint templates, maybe you're a little more comfortable writing your syncs. Like all of these to me affect what would be the most well-behaved and most secure solution. So controller specifically is less obvious to me.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think Max is dead on. I think you know, something I've heard many times is like that GitOps, not only is it an ease of use thing, but that like people are able to create these vast systems of PRs and reviews. And this becomes a lever for various security and administration parts of companies to make sure that they have oversight into what's going on, right? And so that's something, right, that you lose with the controller because it's all happening automatically. So many people might want it, right? But we
Yeah.
And it's like, how can we enable without taking away the ability for people to have the control and visibility that they want?
Sure. But maybe since you brought up like the cloud scenarios, right? In that case, you know, you're not going through CI/CD. So when a cluster is upgraded, then I would think whoever deployed the sync sets would need to now programmatically generate the new sync set based on the new cluster version, the new like Kubernetes APIs, right? So someone had, so I absolutely see the why for shift left. I'm just saying I can see why you wouldn't, like, people want both.
100% agree. Though I would say, kind of to alluding to a part of the conversation earlier, that problem already exists in the config resource, right? Like if someone upgrades, one of the things they have in the config sync only part is about to become useless, right? Maybe it's getting deprecated. They have this problem already. So I think it's also one of these, like, I totally agree the use case is like that it is a very relevant area of user friction, but then it's like, I guess to me, it's like, it's not a problem that we're introducing with the solution. It's more like, this is a class of problem that is worthy of perhaps its own solution, which I would argue that controller is, I guess.
Agreed. Yeah. So yeah, so let's get the Gator stuff going. Sounds like everybody agree on that, and then we get feedback, and then, you know, come back to the controller if there's consensus there, I guess.
Just to clarify real quick, so obviously for this to do anything, we would have to build it into Gator itself, something that ingests these. That's not what you're talking about, right? That we're okay to go on that.
Sorry, say that one last piece.
Well, like if you have Gator make a sync set and Gatekeeper doesn't know how to read a sync set, it doesn't do anything.
Oh no, absolutely. Gator needs to know what sync set is. Yeah.
Right. Okay, cool. So we're okay. Yeah.
I was just saying, like, the responsibility of like who generates sync set, it is, you know, Gator can help with that, or operators can create it and deploy themselves, right? Just
yes.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else from the proposal y'all had are blocked on? No. All right.
I think that was the last one.
All right. Cool. We have like 16 minutes to talk about feedback from KubeCon. Max, do you mind switching back to the meeting notes?
Oh, sorry, I am
Oh,
presenting. Julian, I guess if you stop presenting, does that?
oh, okay, gotcha. I think Max, you are sharing now. Yes. Okay, cool. I mean, just kind of, I wanted to share some of the feedback we got from the KubeCon talk, as well as the Contrib Fest. Charlie was there, so please add anything that I may have missed. But yeah, well, let me just kind of go through one at a time, and feel free to chime in, ask questions. This is a free-form discussion, right? So I just thought it's good to have people look at these together. One was like the OPA talk session. It was completely full, and when we asked people to raise their hands, it seemed like maybe 80% were using OPA today, but maybe only like 30% were using Gatekeeper. So I thought that was interesting.
I think on that point, like why that's interesting was interesting to me was it didn't match the demographic that we saw at the kiosk, the OPA kiosk in the project showcase. Like people were clearly seeking out OPA Gatekeeper as a session and interested to talk about it then. But generally speaking, the people I spoke to at the kiosk were maybe more novice users or just coming into contact with Kubernetes for the first time in the last few months. That's the only thing I would add on that one.
All right.
We also had much better. Well, at least I had quite good questions from people at the end of the session, which was different. The questions for the kiosk were more basic, I suppose.
There was a question from Alex. Were folks using other things in lieu of Gatekeeper? I mean, I know some people said they were using Kyverno. But then that's also not OPA, so I'm not sure why they were in the session if they're not using Gatekeeper or OPA. Maybe we should have asked if they're using Cube Management, actually. That might have been another option they were using. Any other questions? Yep.
Those are kind of the two OPA-based options, is all I was to say.
Yeah. Okay, move on. All right. Also for the piece where I was trying to explain the future looking things for how we're planning to integrate validating emission policy with Gatekeeper. That part was also surprising. I asked if people are aware of validating emission policy and CEL, and not a lot of people raise their hand. So that portion of the presentation was maybe a little over people's head, actually. All right, moving on. There was a question about whether or not Gatekeeper CLI could generate mutated resources as an output. I thought that was a good question. What do y'all think? And if you think it's a good idea, I'll add an issue, I guess.
Generate mutated resources and run the mutators kind of like as a customized kind of situation, like a shift left kind of thing.
Right. And actually, like I looked at the Gator CLI, I don't think we do much with mutation at all. It's mostly just validating, right?
Yeah, I think we use it for expansion templates, maybe. We're ingesting them. Davis would know better, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
Yeah, and so Gator mutate, I think would be actually pretty cool. Yeah, so that's one that we should probably look into. And again, I was told Kyverno does this. It's pretty funny. I mean, not funny, but anyway. Moving on. So one person actually said, hey, we keep opening issues for mutation features and they keep getting closed. Kyverno does it really well. Why can't you guys do it?
So I object to the last bit. They're saying oscillation concerns can be controlled if the operator is careful. It can't. It can, but that's by limiting our syntax, right? Like the problem is the operator, like Kubernetes is a feedback loop, right? Because there's a reconcile thing, even if the request converges because you've stopped iterating, it's just going to re-enter the next time a controller updates a resource, right? So we have no way of actually saying we're done mutating, right? You could do that shift left. You can't do that shift right. Sorry, just arguing with the notes there.
Yeah. And it wasn't, I mean, that's why I want to share this, because I felt like it was not just like one person, that there was another person also said something similar, like we really want to use Gatekeeper, but this is one thing that has really been blocking them. And that's actually why they went to Kyverno. So again, I don't kill the messenger. I think it's one of the louder feedback I got from the conference.
Oh yeah, and that wasn't like a ragey thing. That was just, that is factually not true as written. So
I mean,
we're violating.
I think there is some truth in that, because it depends on what depends on what they want, right? Like we even among us, right, in the past, we said depending on how they write the mutation, like how the mutator works, if the operator is careful, then a lot of the concerns might actually might not be a problem.
Do they mean operator as in human operator or operator as in?
As in human operator, as in
Oh, okay. I thought
we're
they were
super,
talking about
as
K8s
in
operator.
we're super careful because we are imagining a world where, you know, the cluster is shared by a lot of different teams and people are just like deploying random things, right? In which case, yes, oscillation is a huge concern, right? However, you know, people said, hey, you know, we're operators, we understand the concerns, and we're careful when we deploy these mutators. So why limit us, right? And I think that's that's pretty valid, actually.
It is honestly because Core K8s is working on embedded. Like there was a cap just added as
I also
provisional.
mentioned that. I mentioned that to the person as well, but anyway, just thought that was an interesting thing that can. Any other questions about this? If not, I will move on. Okay, another favorite complaint is why can't I see the violating resources from Prometheus? I brought up cardinality, and then they said, what are other alternative ways? And I mentioned, you know, logs and events, and the fact that we're working on PubSub. Again, it's one of those things that, you know, y'all already know this. I just, every time there's at least one person that asks about it. So another one is at the conference, there was another talk by one of the Trivy maintainers, Trivy, the container image scanner solution, with a PM Microsoft, and they actually did a demo that talks about how you can use policy to block vulnerable images from getting deployed in your cluster. And they actually the demo actually integrated with Kyvernal, and it looked super easy. So one thing that I thought was like, hey, you know, I took a look at the Kyvernal stuff because they're entry, it's just integration, the end user experience in terms of actually getting these policies to work is super simple. Whereas like for Gatekeeper, because we need external data, we need something like Ratify to have a verifier that works with Trivy, for example. It's pretty complicated. So again, it's a feedback that I thought I'd bring back to the team. Does that make sense? Yeah.
A little bit yes, a little bit no. So I think the Kyvernal side, what you're saying is Kyvernal just like embedded a, hey, let's reach out to Trivy or whatever scanner, right? And that's like hard coded in Kyvernal.
It's hard coded. I mean, you know, there's plenty of stuff that's hard coded, but because it's hard coded, it's super easy, right? Because Kyvernal maintainers just do it once and it just works, right? Whereas for us, because we have to deal with external data, we have to deal with various providers, and they're not entry, right? So I think the barrier to entry is higher there.
Yeah, well, the one thing where I got a little lost is in your example of how hard it is with Gatekeeper. You had mentioned like you needed more. It sounded like you needed more than just Gatekeeper external data provider. You mentioned something like that integrates with I think you used Trivy or what is Ratify in this case?
Ratify is a solution that has a bunch of different verifiers. So for example, say you want to like check the signature for a container image, you could create a verifier that talks to different signing tools. So either cosign or notary are different verifiers. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm trying to figure out why it's
Or
needed.
you don't have to use Ratify. You could just create your own provider, right? Create your own external data provider that talks to Trivy or whatever scan you want to use.
Ratify here is just an external data provider.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm seeing here is a little bit of an artificial complexity, right? Because you don't need 3 things. You need 2, right? I do agree that Caverno needs less things, to be clear, but
Yeah.
is
And
this-
one of the thoughts I had was like, well, if we want to make it like stupid easy for people to use these things, like very much like Gatekeeper Library, we probably need these like providers to at least be next to the policies, maybe in library. Otherwise, it's really hard to get started, hard to use.
Yeah, the discoverability problem for sure. Like the providers, like there's providers that exist, right?
Yeah, but to your point, you have to know where to look. And like I was looking for the external data provider for cosign, and that's like in a different repo, a different org, right? So you would have to know where to look, basically.
Right. So I guess my question is it just a discoverability problem? Does it need to like,
Not
because you
just
said
that. Yeah, it's also because Kyverno has an entry, they can pretty much always run it as part of their test to make sure all the policies are up to date, right? Whereas because we're relying on external data providers, have no idea if they'll work, if they break. Just a thought, yeah. Yeah, it does seem pretty clunky in comparison. So there's definitely the pros and cons of, the Kyverno's approach to have everything in tree. All right, 2 minutes left. Last one was like, I got a question on Twitter about if external data works with, could be used to evaluate Kubernetes resources. I thought that was interesting. And I think Surtash may have created an issue for that.
in what sense evaluate Kubernetes resources?
So like say instead of using sync to sync the data, you could actually create a provider that calls the Kubernetes API and verifies, right? That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I create an issue for this. So it's like instead of wholesale syncing everything, right? So if you want to do the pods, we have to sync all the pods, right? So with the external data provider, we could be more granular about it. Hey, I only want to check this one thing about pods.
Yeah, I mean, there's could versus should. What? Oh, sorry, I was trying to fix. I think my cat typed on my keyboard a bit. Like you could. That does mean that every write to an API server also calls the API server, right? So you get some request amplification there. And
oh yeah,
also,
it's definitely trade-offs, yeah, for sure. But it would also save from syncing everything, so it would reduce the memory consumption. And it's also instantaneous versus OPA cache being, it's going to take time.
Yeah, if you had good caching and good failure modes and throttling, I could see it for some sort of like referential data light thing that's more like lazily caching. I suppose also the trick would be do you know what you're trying to get before you get it, right? Like containing namespace, things like that, like that's pretty easy to look up. But if it's give me all pods that match the service namespace selectors, so I could be sure they're using the same image, or sorry, service label selectors, so they're using the same image. That's more difficult. I forget what our
I mean, we
Rego.
could do things like uniqueness, right? Like we do it for like the ingress with the Copa cache. So it would be like for the admission resource, like, and then check if there is any other resource exists with those ingress, uniqueness, whatever.
Yeah, but then you need to know what to query, right? And that's more the question, right?
I mean, you will get the query from the admission resource, right? From the policy.
Potentially, like if you could have a label selector filter or something like that, sure. I'm forgetting if the syntax allows that. I think yes. The risk would be if you wind up caching or querying all pods anyway, you have the same memory footprint, at least temporarily, right? It spikes to the same peak, and you have the traffic to the API server, and you have this extra infrastructure. So yeah, I could see it being valuable, but it would be, you'd have to handle it pretty carefully to actually see that value. And we'd want to double check that our syntax allows for you to handle it that way.
All right, for further discussion, we can continue over the issue or bring it up next call. That is all the feedback I wanted to share with y'all. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I hear the session was well attended, by the way.
Yeah, except the validating admission policy was like way, I was like, as I was like talking, I was like, I don't know, half the people know what I'm saying.
I think it is advertised as an intro and deep dive. So I think there were likely many people who did understand as well. So I wouldn't feel too bad about it.
Okay.
Yeah, and honestly, if they didn't know that this was coming, the fact that they've been exposed to the new happenings, right, that is like pretty relevant for policies is probably a good thing for the audience.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hear it was at capacity, actually. Like some people weren't able to get in.
Yep.
We'll need to campaign for a bigger room next time. Give us the keynote arena.
No pressure. Yeah.
All right. Great to see everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks all.
Bye.
See you.